Todd here from Urban Sound Studio, and today we are taking a look at mid-side processing and how to affect width and foreground background using MCAudioLab's Luna 0.5K. Now, before we get into the terminology, let's just talk a little bit about the difference between mid-side recording and mid-side processing. Mid-side recording was developed by Alan Blumlein, and typically it involves using a cardioid microphone pointing at your source and a bidirectional microphone capturing the sides. The benefit here is that we could then balance the amount of the source, or the mid, from the sides, or the ambient material in our recording. Now, similar to this is mid-side processing, where we take a stereo recording and we analyze it and we decode it to be able to affect the mid and the sides independently. Now, a lot of people like this because we can get a lot of width from our recordings and it can sound super big, but it does come with some ramifications. Specifically that when we stretch the sides, or we stretch and exaggerate the width, we could end up with a hole in the center. Let's do some listening. When working with stereo audio, we have a few different options. First is to affect the left and the right side linked together, so that they're both affected together at the same time. This is typical in most compressors. We also have the option of affecting the left and the right side independently, so they're unlinked. Now, the third is to affect the mid and the side independently, where we can affect signal that's in the middle independently from the sides. Pushing the sides makes a stereo track sound wider, but you are stretching it and not extending it. So what does this mean? Let's think about it in terms of some visual sort of relationship. If I take a photograph of myself and I adjust the aspect ratio, I end up stretching the entire image. So something like a picture of my face will appear to get wider at the same time. And eventually it creates different artifacts and a certain type of distortion to the picture. It's this type of distortion that ends up affecting our audio, and it completely messes with the entire stereo image. On Luna, the width knob allows you to stretch or narrow the sides. When you act only on the side, you stretch everything, which creates an unnatural sound and a gap in the middle. Mid and side are dependent on each other. Changing one will always affect the other. If level in the side channel becomes greater than the mid channel, the stereo position can appear to move outside the speakers, left of hard left or right of hard right. It can sound exciting, but will have implications in mono. Listen as we take a mix with the width knob fully up and some to mono. We lose the focus of certain elements, and wide guitars disappear. Now let's listen to the other sound example. MCAudioLab's Luna 0.5K is a fully analog 500 series module. And what it does is it allows us to affect the foreground independently from the background. And it does this by using proper phase relationships. As I mentioned, it's fully analog, so it doesn't use any digital processing or DSP. And it's these phase relationships between the foreground and the background that allows us to get that certain type of magic. The foreground elements have perfect phase correlation, meaning that the same sound comes out of the left and right speakers evenly. These elements are typically bass, kick drum, and snare drum. Background elements have imperfect phase correlation, where the left and right speakers have different elements. With Luna, you can extend the background and focus the foreground. Note that foreground and background are an extension of what traditional mid-side processing does. For example, bringing the foreground up beyond the background can sound more like it focuses elements such as the vocal or the kick. By being able to target one of these independently of the other, you are always mono-compatible, retain a stronger and more focused sound, and are able to achieve stereo width. Now let's listen to the other sound example. Now let's listen as we bring up only the background and compare it to the difference with the width knob. Note that the difference between background and the width knob changes depending on the complexity of the source. So for example, if we take a homogeneous sound, let's say a stereo synth, it's going to have less of a difference between the background and the width than something that's a more complex signal, such as a mix where there was a singer in the center with a bass and then some stereo guitars on the side. You can see I pre-recorded examples with only the width all the way up and then only the background all the way up. Listen to each as I solo between them. If you find that it's difficult to hear a difference, that's okay. The magic is really when we bring in the foreground. But for now, let me invert the polarity of one of them to help you hear where they differ. For me, the big benefit of Luna is that we can EQ the foreground and the background independently from each other. This is where the magic really comes into play. In this case, we want to keep our background focused on higher and mid frequencies for reverb, cymbals, and textural elements. Meanwhile, we want to focus our foreground to be punchy, strong, and establish the low end of our mix. Let's tailor each one. Now that we have a nice blend of foreground and background, we can use the width knob to make additional subtle mid-side style adjustments on top of a focused mix. Now let's listen to the other sound example. Thanks for watching. What did you think of Luna? And what do you think of the whole foreground versus background concept versus traditional mid-side processing? Leave some comments in the chat below. And as always, please help support the channel by liking this video and hitting subscribe.